Good morning.
Hello there. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. How about yourself?
I'm okay. Dreading this cold weather coming.
Man, it's pretty frigid outside already.
Yeah, I was reading this morning though that is it the Iowa caucus Tuesday?
Yeah.
It's supposed to be a wind chill factor of 30 below.
Hmm.
That may keep a few people from voting.
It may. It may. Yowza.
Yeah.
That doesn't even sound like a real temperature. That sounds like it should be like another planet temperature. Hey, Miller.
Good morning.
Hello. My brother Dale, 5 years older than me, when he graduated high school, knew he wasn't going to college, so he ran and joined the Coast Guard as fast as he could because he didn't want to go to Vietnam. And he was sure the Coast Guard would keep him right here in the States around the edges.
Hmm.
And he did not know that the Coast Guard had a base at McMurdo Sound, Antarctica,
Oh,
where he
wow.
got stationed.
Oh, wow.
Oh my goodness. How long was he there?
I think about 3 months. It wasn't a real long time, but it was enough that we've got some photos of him with icicles hanging off his mustache a foot long.
Wow.
Rob took a voluntary trip to Antarctica.
I bet
I
he
guess
didn't
he
have to
didn't.
go outside every day, twice a day, and check all these gauges to make sure nothing was
No.
going to blow up, did he?
Mm.
Oh man. He did go on a really old sailing ship, which he could tell you about, but
Wow.
Oh,
That's
it
awesome.
was so
Yeah.
he's
called
the sailing
the
ship to
Europa.
Antarctica.
Yeah, from Ushuaia to Antarctica.
Wow.
Um,
Wow.
he could tell you more about it. He's got great pictures. I wonder if right in here. No, unfortunately. Um, if
I
you
always
see a
think of the,
picture of like icebergs and stuff in the background, he took that.
that's cool. I always think of The Thing when I think, I mean, like,
Yeah,
great setting for a horror movie.
we've got a board game of that. It's amazing.
A board game.
Yeah, it's really fun.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
So, what
Do
is the temperature down there? Like, it's like 17 here right now.
Oh gosh.
yeah, you
It's
got us beat. It's gonna get up to 47 today. I think it's in the 30s right now.
I thought somebody was
it's
getting like
supposed
really, really cold temperatures.
it's supposed to go down to 11 Monday night
Yeah.
and with a chill factor of 0. Hey,
Oh my
Tony.
gosh.
Good morning,
Hey, we
Tony.
sound like we living in the last days.
Um, well, all right. Is Rob joining us today or is it
Yeah, it just
okay?
went past.
Cool, cool. All right.
I'm in the warm room
No,
today.
no, no rush. Just checking. Yeah. Well, it's good to see you. Good to see you guys today. Yeah, it's pretty nutso weather. I saw the FEMA map and it was like covered most of the United States of like dangerous weather type stuff.
Well, what's so crazy is I still have black-eyed Susans and roses in my yard blooming. Not in abundance, but they're blooming in
Yeah.
January.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's scary.
We brought a lot of plants inside. Yeah, but it's just bizarre.
My roses kind of slowed down blooming, but they never really stopped. I was looking at some flowers the other day. I'm like, why are these still here?
Yeah. What else you guys got going on these days?
Us? Well, we were originally planning to take a trip to Canada this weekend, our first,
Hmm.
but the weather scared us. So,
Hmm.
Canada came to you.
That's right.
right.
And I'm headed out to Lauren sometime next week. I'm not sure exactly when, so I probably won't be here next Sunday.
Okay. All right. Thanks for letting us know. But yeah, safe travels.
And
Um,
they've got about a foot of snow where she is already, so I'm taking snow boots.
mhm. We're supposed to be closing on a house, but who knows which right now that's kind of up in the air because we got some other stuff hanging. We gotta do inspections and um some further inspections. So we're waiting on seeing what that's going to look like. But, hey, Rob.
Hello. Yeah, the weather that scared us away from heading up to Canada was they were talking about an Arctic blast through the Fraser Valley that was going to create wind chill of -40, and you'd basically get frostbite from spending a minute outside. And we thought, well, you spend a minute getting from a car to a hotel, so
Yeah,
I think I'll pass.
yeah. You need a spacesuit.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll tell you what, let's do this. Hang on, let me get the let's do uh Miller, can you be the liturgist today?
Sure.
Um
Oh, I want to say ass on TV.
you're not afraid of cussing anyway, you know?
No.
So, Tony, can you be voice of the people?
Absolutely.
Okay. Rob, could you do the Hebrew Bible reading?
Sure.
And Paula, if you would do the gospel reading. Will that work?
Okay, Dave,
Yes,
I'm
ma'am.
breaking up and I don't know what you said.
Oh, could you do the
I if go ahead.
could you do the gospel reading?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
okay.
And if I don't show up when it's time for the gospel reading, my computer's blinked again, so somebody jump in.
I
Will
got
do.
you.
Will do. Thank you. All right, Miller, when
Okay.
you're ready.
Good morning, everybody. It is January the 14th. In medieval France, January 14th marked the Feast of the Ass, a celebration of all the donkey stories in the Bible. In particular, they honored the donkey who carried the Holy Family on their flight to Egypt. Today is the birthday of Lutheran pastor Martin Niemöller in 1892. He originally supported Hitler, but regretted it later and was imprisoned for his resistance activities. He is famous for his poem, which begins, "First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist." Today is also the feast day of the Vasayam Pillai, who converted from Hinduism to Roman Catholicism in the 1740s and became a public witness for his faith. The Pope declared him a saint in 2022. Tomorrow, January 15th, is when the birthday of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the observance of the public holiday in his honor coincide. He was born on January 15th, 1929. The Lord be with you.
And also with you,
Hear these words of invitation.
the hospitality of God knows no bounds.
The love of God is immeasurable.
The generosity of God is beyond our wildest dreams.
We gather today as invited ones,
As beloved ones,
as blessed ones.
draw near and let us break the bread of life.
Today's responsive reading comes from Psalm 139. O Lord, you have searched me and known me.
You know when I sit down and when I rise up, you discern my thoughts from far away.
You search out my path and my lying down and are acquainted with all my ways.
Even before a word is on my tongue, O Lord, you know it completely.
You hem me in, behind and before, and lay your hand upon me.
Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is so high that I cannot attain it.
For it was you who formed my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb.
I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made.
Wonderful are your works that I know very well.
My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth.
Your eyes beheld my unformed substance.
In your book were written all the days that were formed for me, when none of them as yet existed.
How weighty to me are your thoughts, O God.
How vast is the sum of them.
I try to count them. They are more than the sand.
I come to the end, I'm still with you.
Today's Hebrew Bible reading comes from 1 Samuel chapter 3. Now the boy Samuel was serving the Lord under Eli. The Lord's word was rare at that time, and visions weren't widely known. One day Eli, whose eyes had grown so weak he was unable to see, was lying down in his room. God's lamp hadn't gone out yet, and Samuel was lying down in the Lord's temple, where God's chest was. The Lord called to Samuel. "I'm here," he said. Samuel hurried to Eli and said, "I'm here. You called me?" "I didn't call you," Eli replied. "Go lie down." So he did. Again, the Lord called Samuel. So Samuel got up, went to Eli, and said, "I'm here. You called me?" "I didn't call, my son," Eli replied. "Go lie down." Now Samuel didn't yet know the Lord, and the Lord's word hadn't yet been revealed to him. A third time the Lord called Samuel. He got up, went to Eli, and said, "I'm here. You called me?" Then Eli realized that it was the Lord who was calling the boy. So Eli said to Samuel, "Go and lie down. If he calls you, say, 'Speak, Lord, your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went and lay down where he'd been. Then the Lord came and stood there, calling just as before, "Samuel, Samuel." Samuel said, "Speak, your servant is listening." The Lord said to Samuel, "I am about to do something in Israel that will make the ears of all who hear it tingle. On that day, I will bring to pass against Eli everything I said about his household, every last bit of it. I told him that I would punish his family forever because of the wrongdoing he knew about, how his sons were cursing God, but he wouldn't stop them. Because of that, I swore about Eli's household that his family's wrongdoing will never be reconciled by sacrifice or by offering." Samuel lay there until morning, then opened the doors of the Lord's house. Samuel was afraid to tell the vision to Eli, but Eli called Samuel, saying, "Samuel, my son." Samuel said. "What did he say to you?" Eli asked. "Don't hide anything from me. May God deal harshly with you, and worse still, if you hide from me a single word from everything he said to you." So Samuel told him everything and hid nothing from him. "He is the Lord," Eli said. "He will do as he pleases." So Samuel grew up, and the Lord was with him, not allowing any of his words to fail. All Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, knew that Samuel was trustworthy as the Lord's prophet.
John 1:43-51. The next day, Jesus went into Galilee, and he found Philip. Jesus said to him, "Follow me." Philip was from Bethsaida, the hometown of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found the one Moses wrote about in the law and the prophets, Jesus, Joseph's son from Nazareth." Nathanael responded, "Can anything good come from Nazareth? Or can anything from Nazareth be good?" Philip said, "Come and see." Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him and said about him, "He is a genuine Israelite in whom there is no deceit." Nathanael asked him, "How do you know me?" Jesus answered, "Because Philip called you, before Philip called you, I saw you under the fig tree." Nathanael replied, "Rabbi, you are God's son. You are the King of Israel." Jesus answered, "Do you believe because I told you that I saw you under a fig tree? You will see greater things than these. I assure you that you will see heaven open and God's angels going up to heaven and down to earth on the human one." May God bless the hearing of this word.
Thanks be to God.
Martin Niemöller had originally supported Hitler and had been publicly anti-Jewish. Niemöller was arrested by the Gestapo and imprisoned for his resistance activities. The version of his poem at the United States Holocaust Memorial says, "First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out, because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out, because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out, because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." You're
Oh, I
muted,
was
Dave.
I was muted. Thank you. Thank you for getting us started with worship today. We're going to move into a time of prayer. I will begin us with an opening prayer, and those of you who are attending worship today, whether you're on Facebook or YouTube, if you would like to lift up a prayer request, you can do so just by putting it in the comments. I'll keep an eye on YouTube. Tony, do you mind keeping an eye on Facebook for us? And that way we can all pray together. So let's go to God in prayer. Gracious God who loves us, we give you thanks for the day that you give us, for breath in our lungs, for the songs of our hearts, for the ability to connect with each other through technology over the entire United States. We give you thanks for this gathering and the ability to direct our hearts in worship toward you, even though we are scattered. We keep in mind all those who are scattered willingly or unwillingly today, those who are refugees, who have been displaced from their homes in Gaza and Ukraine, those who are migrants looking for safe harbor. All through history, God, your story tells of people who are exiled and wandering. And with the ancient people of medieval France, we remember the flight of the Holy Family to Egypt, looking for a safe place to land. So our hearts are with all those today who feel without safety. We also lift up to you people and situations who are close to us, those who are looking for healing, those who are looking for direction and comfort. And we name situations of both of praise and of petition before you in our hearts. I invite those of you listening to share.
For Daryl Hardy.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Camille's mother's health and the health of her mother-in-law.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For the family of my uncle Bill Butler.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Chris, his parents, and their family.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Bobby Matthews and his family.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Healing for Ward Watson.
Lord, hear our prayer. For John and Judy Pritchett, Lord, hear our prayer.
For Harold Sinclair.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Eleanor Schwartz.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Kathy's grandson Phoenix and their families.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For baby Kai and his family.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Georgie.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For my Uncle Merle and his family.
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Rob's Aunt Donna.
Lord, hear our prayer.
God, for all those
For
that
the
we've I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oops, sorry. For the safety and security of our country and all its peoples.
Lord, hear our prayer.
God, for all those that we've named with our mouths, those that we've named in our hearts, and for the prayers we don't know how to put words to, we give you thanks that you hear all of our prayers and that you answer. And we, excuse me, we join in the prayer that Jesus shared with us. Holy One, our Mother and Father, let your name be revered. Let your reign come. Let your will be done on earth as it is in the heavens. Give us today the bread we need for today, and forgive our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial, and deliver us from evil. For yours is the sovereignty, the power, and the glory, now and forever. Amen. So right as I'm supposed to talk a little bit about this, I get a frog in my throat. So pardon me for my hemming and hawing as I talk today. Uh, all the texts today, which I think is an interesting lectionary Sunday, all the texts today are really about God's foreknowledge. And I put foreknowledge in quotes because oftentimes, we hear these things as though God is predicting the future, as though there's knowledge of things that haven't happened yet. And yet, even from the earliest times, people have understood that the future is not the future to God, that all of time is spread out before God uh, a like a picture or like a book. C.S. Lewis even talks about the fact that, just like God has a book and can flip forward and backward, that God has all of eternity to listen to the prayer, the split second prayer of a person who's about to have a car wreck, right? So that it's not like, you can slip one by God. All moments God can spend in eternity with every moment. And that somehow, if we kind of achieve uh, a mystical state of consciousness, if we kind of get the big picture view, that we find eternity in every single moment, that every moment is like a snapshot, and God has all of eternity to explore everything in that snapshot. So I think that's a really beautiful picture, a beautiful image. And I think it's a lot better than when we talk about things like predestination. I even, wonder what that means. Like there's destiny, but this is like predestiny. It's like before. So we need like predestiny or something like that. The idea of predestination, we have these fights sometimes in Christian theology. Do we have free will or is everything determined? And if everything is determined, is it's God's responsibility and yada, yada, yada. And I think those can be interesting discussions sometimes. And sometimes I think it's a lot of, mental hamster wheel churning. Um, but I do think that from a particular perspective, it's not like we're going to surprise God. Like nothing is a surprise to God. And yet I think we're sort of invited into this collaborative project of building the future. That God is working with us and with all of creation to create God's preferred future, preferred outcome. And the idea, I think, in Christian faith is we're moving towards the kingdom, that this isn't like just one horrible thing after another. We're not just born into a universe of pain and suffering, but that God is somehow working with us to create something that God wants to be born out of creation. So I want to look at each of these scriptures a little bit. The gospel reading, in the gospel reading, there's two disciples, Nathaniel, who apparently is hanging out underneath a fig tree when his friend Philip comes along and says, "Hey, we found the Messiah." And you hear his skepticism. Can anything good come from Nazareth? And he goes and he meets Jesus. And when Jesus says somehow, and we don't really know what's going on here, there seems to be a lot between the lines. Jesus says, "Oh, here's an honest fellow," which is a little bit, there's a little bit of irony and a little bit of dig there because he just said, "Nothing good can come out of Nazareth." And Jesus is like, "You're a very genuine person. You're a very honest guy." He's not offended. Jesus isn't hurt that Nathaniel doesn't expect anything good to come out of Nazareth. He says, "Here comes a man in whom there's no deceit." And you can kind of hear a little bit of elbowing in that. And Nathaniel's like, "How do you know me?" Because obviously Jesus, I think he hears that little dig or that little elbow that, Jesus knows he's been insulting. And he says, "How do you know me?" And Jesus says, "Oh, I saw you while you were under the fig tree." And somehow that has meaning for Nathaniel, right? I mean, Jesus could mean, "Yeah, I was walking by in the distance and I saw you over there." I think we're supposed to read it as there's somehow this mystical knowledge that Jesus has of Nathaniel, had a vision of Nathaniel under the fig tree, and that so hits Nathaniel squarely that he immediately says, "Oh, obviously you are the Messiah. My mistake." Now, we don't really know what the significance is. Maybe the fig tree has some special significance to Nathaniel. Maybe it was Um, we don't actually know when that event occurred, but it was something important to him and it resonates with him. And I think about there are times in my life when some sort of divine coincidence happened that if I tell you about it, it will seem really stupid, but to me, it means everything. Like there was something that lined up or something that made me feel like God was looking out for me. And if I told it to you, somehow symbolically, I saw something that meant something to me, it just wouldn't make sense to you. Do you know what I mean? You may have had similar experiences. So that's the New Testament story. Somehow Jesus has this divine knowledge or foreknowledge or mystical knowledge of something that was happening in the universe. We get a little taste of God's omniscience, that God knows everything, and that Jesus has a pipeline to that kind of knowledge. The other story from the Old Testament, we hear Samuel being, this is a famous call story of Samuel the prophet, that God calls him in the temple, and it's very moving. The first part of this actually is in the lectionary. The second part, the awful stuff that happens to Eli, is in brackets. So it's like you can include this if you want to. We'd really like you just to do the first part of the story because that's, speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. Oh, that's a wonderful call story. All right, now what God's going to tell you is all the awful things that God's going to do to Eli. That's a little less preachable, honestly. It's difficult, right? But there's something there about, again, God's foreknowledge. God's not predicting the future, right? God is authoring the future. And then the first scripture we read was from the Psalms. And I have to share a little bit of something here that kind of sticks in my craw sometimes. Beautiful psalm. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up, you discern my thoughts from far away. God has intimate knowledge of who we are. And then the psalmist gets a little bit philosophical, goes a little bit into sort of the predestination area. Says, you hem me in behind and before, you lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It's so high I cannot attain it. It was you who formed my inward parts, my guts. You created this miraculous body of mine. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, I know very well. Again, amazed by the astonishing human creation that he is. And then the psalmist goes on, my frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes beheld my unformed substance. In your book were written all the days that were formed for me when none of them as yet existed. So the idea that God knew all the stuff that was going to happen, not only before you were born, but before you were born. Like when you were just raw material, stuff in the earth, right? Carl Sagan has this wonderful description of how we're made of star stuff, like the things that make us up were born in the heart of stars billions of years ago. And that if you think about like the stuff you're made of, right? It didn't just pop into existence. When you think of this thing that you are, it's astonishing, right? It's more like all these different materials came together, and then you have this, brief little window of consciousness, 80 years, 100 years, maybe if you're lucky, right? Or unlucky, I'm not sure. You have this brief window of consciousness that this stuff has life, and then we go back into the earth. And this amazing when you think about it, it blows your mind. All right. The bit that sticks in my craw is that this verse is often used by people who are against abortion, right? You knew me before I was in my mother's womb. Well, it's you knew me before I was in my mother's womb, right? It's not like I saw you and then like someone ruined God's plans when they had a miscarriage or when a baby was aborted, right? It's not like, oh, God has been frustrated in God's plans. The psalmist is saying, you knew me before I was born, and the whole aspect of human existence is just mind-boggling. I'll also share that part of the reason this sticks in my craw so much is that this translation says, and I chose the New Revised Standard Version here because it says, "Your eyes beheld my unformed substance." And unfortunately, in the Common English Bible, that gets translated as, "Your eyes beheld my embryo." And yeah, I know. So there was a deliberate translation choice there. The word here in Hebrew is golem. It's the only place it's used in the Hebrew Bible. And if you know anything about, if you like sci-fi and fantasy, golems were the ideas of kind of these puppets made by Jewish sorcerers who were made out of mud or stone or something else, that they were not living, but they had the semblance of life. So it's a little bit of a stretch, especially because the author seems to be saying, "You knew me before you knit me together in my mother's womb. You knew me before that, and you knew me before that, and you knew me before that." That the author is going back in time. You knew me when I was in the depths of the earth. You knew me when I was whatever, some unformed substance, the material of earth and ashes, right? And I think by trying to massage this into being about, yeah, God just stitched you together in the womb and that's it. Like I feel like that politicized translation does a injustice to the text, the author's artistry, which is saying, "You knew me when I was just ashes and dust," right? And before I had a form, before I had a substance, before there was any kind of life. And I think what the author's boggled by is just the fact that God stands outside of time and sees everything, sees all of human history, all of human existence, and then down to the intimate details of knowing what's on my tongue before I say it. So this is one reason why when we talk about things like predestination and free will, I feel like we almost kind of miss the point. That this isn't about God being able to, God's magic and knows the future. That there's something about the idea of the divine perspective on things is one where there is no beginning and no end. Which is where you come to the end of the poem. How weighty are your thoughts, O God? How vast is the sum of them? I try to count them. They are more than the sand. I come to the end, and I'm still with you. That's where we end. And I think that's what Nathaniel felt when Jesus somehow had this knowledge of him underneath a fig tree. This was a callback, right, to the psalm. You know me intimately, and that's astonishing. Anyway, that's what I wanted to share with you today. I would love to hear your reflections on either synchronicity, things that you've seen in your own life or observed, where it's like you have that sense of God's foreknowledge or care or direction or something in your life. Or if you would like to go more abstract and philosophical, I would love to hear your thoughts about that kind of stuff, predestination and free will and all that. All that, you know.
Oh,
Yeah.
on the predestination, I'm a simple person. uh, I took my three grandchildren about a month ago to Children's Theater and stopped at Chipotle on the way home for lunch. And I told them while we were in the car, you can order anything you want. Think about what you want. I already knew what they were going to order because I know them that well. Miles was going to get a burrito stuffed with everything. The other two were both going to get cheese quesadillas, but they had free will. They could have picked anything, but I knew them. And when it comes to the whole free will thing, yeah, I think we have free will, but I think God knows us well enough that He's pretty well informed about what we're going to choose.
Thank you. Thank you, Paula. Yeah, Tony.
Paula, that's a great analogy. I was going to go in a little bit of a different direction, and I guess I'm gonna break my comments up because I could talk forever about this. But there, when I think about that, I don't really think about it in terms of God knows what's going to happen. I mean, I know He knows what's going to happen, but we also have some type of influence on how things happen as well. And sometimes I think that God kind of gives us signs that we kind of miss. Dave, you read my book, you know, and like in the post log of my book, I talk about all these coincidences. So like in 2014 on October 1st, I was diagnosed with colorectal cancer through surgery, chemo, and all that on September 30th, which is exactly 365 days later, you know, I'm cancer free. There was another thing like that with my son and Maurice. So like my son I wrote about in the book died on October 18th. Maurice's birthday is October 17th. Again, 365 days. And for me, I looked at that as God giving me signs that, you know, despite what you've been through, despite what happened, you know, you're going to be okay. There are a couple other coincidences like that that happened. Like even when we were in the process of adopting Maurice, we had our home inspection on Chatari's birthday, which was February 6th. And like there's always these little things that just kind of happen. Even with the house we just bought, the man who lived next door to to us actually is who we bought the house from, but he bought it on Demetrius's birthday the previous year before we moved in. And so like I'm constantly looking at things like, okay, God, what are you trying to show me, or what are you trying to get me to recognize in this? Because I think a lot of times we look at things and I always see are the bad things or things we don't understand. But I think a lot of times they're just lessons that God wants you to see that we're so busy looking at the forest that we can't see the trees.
Thank you for that, Tony. Yeah, Miller, you got your hand up.
Yeah. I mean, really what I have to say kind of goes perfectly off of that, which is that I think what the psalmist is so amazed about is like God's perspective on things and like sort of like trying to put themselves in God's place. Like how could you see all these things and know all these things? And it really kind of links up to the poem that was in the liturgy today about, you know, they came for the socialists. Um, like that poem is about perspective and knowing that, you know, you could be next or you will be next, you know. Like seeing the patterns of you know the ripples. And I think about it like in terms of Samuel as well. Like he easily, you know, being a child brought up basically in the temple by Eli, he easily could have taken on Eli's perspective and been on his side in this whole like, you know, debacle with his sons and all that. But God offered him this opportunity to sort of separate himself from that and take a different path. Yeah, I think the perspective that we're offered in this sort of miraculous way, I guess, you know, it honestly it kind of makes me think the whole Psalm thing makes me think of this movie called, is it Tree of Life, Rob? The one I always joke that
Yes,
it has,
yeah, the Terrence Malick Tree of
yeah, Terrence
Life.
Malick.
Yeah, I love
I
that
always joke
movie.
it has like what I call a guitar solo in the middle of it because like you're following this family, you know, this very mundane family, you know, through some life events, and then all of a sudden you sort of zoom out and you're looking at like the beginning of life on Earth, and then there's like dinosaurs, and then there I don't know, like
Yeah.
yeah,
Right. Well, yeah, I mean the Psalm puts you in this like I'm part of this epic story. And it may be a pretty mundane bit, but I'm part of this epic I think of the like is it Lauren Isley, The Immense Journey? Just this idea I'm part of this immense life story that's bigger than me. Yeah. And thank you for bringing up the poem too. I mean, it seems like that perspective, like when you zoom out, you suddenly realize, oh yeah, I'm not any different than anybody else. I mean, I think part of that perspective is that, oh, we're in this together instead of you're over there somehow separate from me. Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah, Rob.
So, oh gosh, I'm sorry. I Sorry, I just heard Kira shouting, and it totally
No,
swerved my brain.
that's how it
So
happens.
I'll start with an observation from Samuel. This is reading that, and how so poor Eli is just a tired old man, and he wants very badly to sleep, and it's the wee hours, and Samuel is supposed to be in there with the fire because the fire hasn't gone out yet. Basically, he's the fire alarm, right? Although I'm sure there's also some like liturgical purpose, like you don't leave the fire untended or whatever, but you don't leave the fire untended. And then here I feel Eli so much. Here comes the kid. Hey, did you call me? You know, I need a drink of water. I need to go potty. Go lie down. Go to sleep. I just saying there was a moment there. Um, as far as sort of the more cosmic picture, you used some terminology, and I think it's good. It's good terminology. It's poetic, but it's also still potentially, abused, right? Where God's authorship, right? We still need to understand that God is not directly controlling things because there's this bad theology that gets taken for granted that everything that happens is God's responsibility.
Yeah.
And I think there's this really important perspective shift that says, well, nothing that happens is a surprise to God, right? Which means that in the fullness of the whole thing, where from the perspective that everything exists because God wants it to exist, and because God has all of eternity in view, you know, the benevolent purposes of God can work through all these things without it being a matter of God directly moving these pieces, right?
Hmm.
Because it can be much more about God knowing the character of all of us and knowing how we're going to interact. And having the benevolent intention when setting all these things into motion. And this just takes you back to the crazy perspective of the Psalm, right? That like there's going to be a period of time where some stuff that used to be dinosaur poop and became Dave, right? And some other
Hmm.
stuff, this other star stuff that's actually spent some time in the guts of worms, for a while organizes itself and becomes Miller. And
Hmm.
these two miraculous things are going to be in existence at the same time for a little while before they both go on to become worm food again.
Hmm.
Like, I love that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're honestly it reminds me of a conversation we were having a few weeks ago where we were starting to look at the timelessness and the cyclicality of the church age versus a linear motion toward a culminating apocalypse,
Hmm.
right? It's everything happens over and over again, you know and I mean, I think this idea of predestination, you see it arising from that very linear perspective of
Yeah.
like, well, it's a sequence of events and it's going from point A to point B. Teresa mentioned time's arrow in the
Hmm.
chat, right? And in the end, we're going to see, some big climactic thing will be a big war and everything's going to end and woohoo.
Yeah.
And just how completely different that is from this cosmic timelessness of the psalm, that
Hmm.
if they had had the terminology, they would have talked about star stuff and they would
Yeah.
have talked about dinosaurs, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. Absolutely. Yeah, Paula, go ahead.
I'm going back to simplicity from all that big brain stuff. uh, my daughter Joanna, the youngest one, is pregnant again. Uh, again. Uh, yeah. When she found out she was pregnant, one of the first things she said was, I hope it's a girl, and I want to name her after Mama Sis. Mama Sis was my mother. Her name was Iona. But Joanna said, I told Trevor I would like to name her Iona. And Trevor said, I own a man? I don't think so. uh, well, a little time passed. And so then she says that there's this herbalist that's up in northern Georgia somewhere whose name is Yana. And she said, I think I might name her Yana if it's a girl. Well, it took us a while, but then we found out that Yana is a more ancient form of Iona. And then when she finally went to see a doctor, the baby is due on March the 14th, which is my mother's birthday. So I'm really hoping for a girl. I will put up with one more boy. And Tony, my birthday is October the 18th. And one last little thing. I adore Nathaniel. He's one of my favorite characters. He might have been a cynic and a little, he was honest. And when Jesus came to him and said, here's a completely honest man, Nathaniel didn't go, no, I'm not. I'm not me. He went, well, how did you know? He accepted his gift. And I love completely honest people who say what they think.
Like Tony.
And people expect them to say, which is one reason I adore Tony. Okay, I'm through.
See, Dave, you knew Paula so well. You knew what she was going to say.
I knew.
Even when she froze.
Amazing.
Amazing.
It's divine foreknowledge. It's divine foreknowledge.
I think you're God. Like that was just a God work right there.
As much as everybody else is.
Question.
But look, every time I think about how clueless like the ancients were about science and time, with time being a construct, I'm starting to, and I'm surprised. I was waiting on Rob to go here, and he just refused. So I'm about to go here for him. But like, I know you've been watching the stuff on the James Webb Telescope, and how now they're finding stuff that existed before the Big Bang was supposed to happen. And so like now they're talking about time being like everything happened all at once at the same time. So like, it is very heady. It is very, very heady. But like when you think about if we look at a star like Betelgeuse, like that's probably exploded already. We don't know it's going to explode until whatever time it takes that light to get here to us. So like the whole linear part of time is like been thrown on its ear. And so like it kind of makes me think, like you said earlier, like, well, maybe they knew and they just didn't have the words for it. Because a lot of things that we have thought have been like etched in stone, get that little pencil and erase that out a little bit because we're not really sure. The last thing I want to say is every time we have a conversation like this, I feel like I have to bring up what's the movie? The Adjustment Bureau. About free will. Like, there are a lot of times when, God wants us to do certain things and, and sometimes there are obstacles in our way to try to get us to do what he wants us to do. As a matter of fact, I remember when I told y'all about my cancer-free diagnosis, and I didn't even think about September 30th and what it would mean to my testimony about my cancer diagnosis. I actually was trying to move my appointment that day. And even though I was cancer free already, that was the day when it was confirmed. And I think it was important for me, and I really wanted to change that appointment. Like I wasn't going to change it to another day, but I think it makes my testimony about my cancer diagnosis even stronger that I did not change that day. And and again, it's just one of those things where this has already happened, but like it's a better story when it actually coincides with what it was supposed to do. I'm done.
You're muted, Dave.
I'm sorry. I said thank you, Tony. Rob, go ahead.
I knew you were gonna say that.
So, Paula, your story about Chipotle, I really loved. It gave me such a good image for sort of a pet way of thinking about this that I've had for a long time that I call character determinism. Because like philosophically, I have a real problem with the idea of a free, undetermined choice, right? I kind of feel like the only free, undetermined choice that was ever made was God's decision that something other than God's self should exist. And that everything else is actually proliferated from just who we are, that is just driven by character. Originally, everything is driven by the character of who God is, right? That drives the sort of things that are going to exist. The choices we make in our lives are driven by who we are, our character. And I mean, that's recursively shaped, right? Our choices refract through us and shape our character over time. But like the idea that you ever sit down and just have like a totally, well, it could be A or it could be B, and I have this sort of, ex nihilo ability to just decide one or the other, free of any and all influence. I've always found that ridiculous. So, rather than it being a predestination thing, I think it's just we're seeing who we are, and it's reasonable for us to be held accountable for who we are. There's this interesting sort of desire to, like, on the part of some people, I think, to sort of be able to say, well, whose fault was it, right? Is it God's fault? Is it my fault? And it's like, well, maybe it's not a fault at all. It's just consequences that accrue. Some of us have a very bad relationship to the word consequences because of how we were parented, maybe, and so that is aligned with the idea of fault. But I really just mean that, like, well, who you are has caused things, and you live with that. And some of it's good, some of it's bad. It is what it is, There's really not, there's no one even to blame, and it's not an issue of like deciding see, when people are, I guess it makes more sense to worry about it if you're convinced that God is also looking to punish you for things, and you want to know whether you're being rightly punished or whether God is a jerk.
Yes.
So you need a different, sort of concept to probably go this direction at all. The other thing I want to say is so the story with Nathaniel, I feel a lot of kinship with Nathaniel. I think, Jesus, it's sort of like Jesus said, yeah, here's a person who doesn't mince words. Here's a guy who says what he's thinking, right? These are things I have heard said of myself. I feel you, Nathaniel. Um, and my pet theory is that the fig tree story must be something that is actually a guilty or a shameful episode for Nathaniel. Don't know exactly what that might be, right? But it's something that in his mind is a secret, and it's something that he carries and feels bad about. And so when Jesus says, I know about the fig tree, Nathaniel's like, you are God's son. Please don't tell them what happened under the fig tree. I get it now. I'm sorry. Mea culpa, mea maxima culpa.
Thank you for that, Rob. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it has some special meaning for Nathaniel that it doesn't have for us. It's not just, oh, he was sitting under a fig tree and Jesus saw him. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead, Miller.
Yeah. Well, mostly I wanted to read some comments.
Yes, please.
Yeah. But I also wanted, so I mentioned that there's a cool short story by Ted Chiang about golems and like sort of the sort of preformed nature of humanity, and yeah, he sort of managed to connect it to DNA, which is really cool. I can't remember the name of it, but it's in one of his short story collections. He only has two.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find it and put it in the chat.
And then Rob, following on to that, was they should have said, "You saw my homunculus," and then we'd understand that the Bible's biology is dodgy.
Yeah, I was thinking about that you're translating golem, right? Rather than saying embryo, like really they should have said in the CEB, well, I guess it's not common English, but rightly they could have said homunculus, and it would have been clear that it's a reference to an older,
Yeah.
false biological understanding, right?
Yeah.
So Camille says, Eli's response to Samuel accepting what God will do to his family is akin to Mary's, let it be done according to your will.
Mm.
But when predestination is used to describe our actions as God's puppets, it seems to be used as an excuse to circumvent free will and justify bad motives and actions. God understands us and the entirety of our workings, so our actions are not a surprise no matter what we do. The trick for us is to understand that and purposefully make the choice to do good in the world and surprise even ourselves.
Thank you for that.
Teresa says, she says, "Oh God, how are you not bound by time's arrow?" Yeah. Camille says the story of Nathaniel could have been the first bit of snark in the Bible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's see. Camille mentions Jesus getting mad at a fig tree later. And Teresa says, it's humbling when you understand how much we serve grand plans for our fungal underlords. They're just managing up. That's only partially tongue in cheek. I have experienced often how I don't get how much we are woven into the grand scheme until much later. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. Absolutely. Well, I think kind of connecting to that and Rob, what you were saying a little bit earlier, one of the things I'm fascinated by is what we have learned about human consciousness, which is like, they put electrodes on people's brains and look at their fMRI scans, and they can tell, like, before we make a decision, before we're conscious that we've made a decision, they can see the action potential of synapses increase. So it's like before you make a decision, before you're aware you're making a decision, they can see the change happening in your brain. And so most of the decisions, quote unquote, that you make, you're not even conscious of, right? You're reacting to some kind of chemical stuff that's going on in your brain, and then it pops in your consciousness. Oh, I'll decide to go do this. Well, yeah, but you decided about a minute and a half ago, and so we have this experience of freedom, but really it's our consciousness going, oh, this popped into my head, and now this popped into my head. And it's not really like, but it doesn't, I guess the thing I struggle with is that doesn't mean we aren't free. And then, what does it mean to be free? Kind of like I think what you were talking about, Rob, which is, when I think about, how we choose versus how we react, I always come back to that story of the Buddhist in the two boats. The guy that went out in the middle of the lake to meditate in a boat, and because to get away from everybody, and an empty boat comes and hits him. And of course, his eyes are closed, so he assumes there's a fisherman in the other boat. And he opens his eyes, getting ready to cuss the other guy out, and he realizes the boat is empty. And then his anger has no place to go. And so his first revelation is that the other boat is empty. But the second revelation is that his own boat is empty because he was just reacting. He was being like a boat just bumping into another boat, right? He's just like a billiard ball. And so often that's what we are. We're just reacting. It's just the chemicals in my head responding to whatever trigger is happening. But that there's even hate to say it's a choice because you learned it, right? Someone taught it to you. There's a space that you can create when you realize you're just reacting that somehow allows grace to enter. And that's where I think the freedom is. It's like when I realize how beholden I am to just the chemicals in my brain and my conditioning and my trauma and all the other stuff, when I realize I'm just really along for the ride, suddenly I have a choice. You know, that's the choice or that's the freedom. Anyway, it's a little too up there, but I do feel like, yeah, do I really have free will? It's in that moment that I have free will. Anyway, other thoughts, other perspectives? Thank you for a rich conversation, by the way. We're pulling up on 11. Doesn't mean we have to stop it immediately at 11, but well, thank you all so much for a rich conversation. Let's go ahead and close out our time together with our liturgy. Let's see.
Oh, sorry, I put it in the chat, but we should mention if folks are interested, the Ted Chiang story that
Oh
Miller
yeah,
do. It's a short story. It's called 72 Letters.
72 letters. Thanks for putting that in the chat. Yeah. All right. Miller, can you close us out with the Hildegard prayer?
Sure. Jesus Christ, the love that gives love, you are higher than the highest star. You are deeper than the deepest sea. You cherish us as your own family. You embrace us as your own spouse. You rule over us as your own subjects. You welcome us as your dearest friend. Let all the world worship you. Amen.
God is love. Nothing is wasted. All things shall be well. Go in peace.
Thank you all for doing house church worship with us today. I want to go ahead and let you know if you're on the stream, we're going to be doing a house church / small group Sunday afternoons, and the topic, it's going to be a short term, about 8-week study. The topic is going to be Christianity and non-ordinary states of consciousness, or Christianity and mysticism. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the recent research into consciousness and spirituality and psychedelics and other kind of stuff. We're also going to look at Brian Murarescu's book, The Immortality Key. I have a critical read on that. I don't buy everything he says, but just wanted to let you know if you're interested in that. It will be meeting in Birmingham. We will probably try to do a Zoom, but we won't live stream like on Facebook or YouTube, just so it feels a little more private. We prefer to do when we do house church. Sometimes if we do a public thing like that, it changes how people talk, and we want to be able to have honest conversation. So,
Well, as much as I want to be there, I've reached the age where I don't want to drive at night. I'm having a hard time seeing,
I
so
hear
I
that.
probably won't make it.
Okay. Well, if you want to tune in to Zoom, we'll make sure we're available on Zoom. Okay. So, and the tentative thing is that we'll be at the Powell's house in Homewood, but we'll get out more information about that as we go. We'll probably need, for those who attend, to come up with a schedule because they can't necessarily host it every weekend. So just like normal house church, we'll have to play it by ear. So thank you all for being here today. I'm going to go ahead and end the live stream. If you're on Zoom, you can stick around for a minute more.